Welcome back to another episode of Into the Nothing with me, your host, Patrice Douglas. Into the Nothing. I just love these conversations because I really am practicing trusting what wants to flow in these conversations. They're not planned. We have an intention every time, when I'm with myself or when I have a guest speaker, but it really is just opening it up as to what the entity of Into the Nothing wants to speak into. And my guest today is very practiced in trusting the moment and trusting what wants to be expressed. And my guest today is a woman called Rebecca Thompson, who's actually my mentor. And I've been working with her for just over a year now, and she has 100% changed my life. And so much of what I teach and what I embody now is because of this woman. And I'm just feel so grateful that the way that we met is just so fascinating. I love how the universe takes us along these funny little paths. And so a little context for this inspiring mentor of mine. Rebecca Thompson is an integrated health and personal development specialist. She is the creator of the Be a Beacon program, which I am part of. And she's also a published musician, and she's also an inspirational speaker. Rebecca has 28 years under her belt in the wellness and personal development arena as a physio, a yoga teacher, presence teacher, and coach. She's really the whole package. She has forged a unique and truly holistic way of working with conscious women who want to live with peace, passion, and purpose, making a positive impact in the world without the burnout. And gosh, have I just really, really tuned in to how I feel about Rebecca Bex. Oh, she's just the embodiment of, the words that want to come through right now, just this wise woman. But she's also, like, when you're with her, she makes this wisdom feel so tangible, and also she's just a ball of fun. So she really, the thing I love about her and I've experienced in her is, and she's really taught me, is like to really embody the full range of human expression of just, sometimes I'm with her and she's just like this, like so filled with joy. She's like a 12-year-old little girl, but then the next minute, she's dropping into wisdom that feels like she's hundreds of years old, and she just knows. And so Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me on Into the Nothing.
Thank you for having me. What a great little intro. I feel like I have to be all of everything now.
Yeah, I know. Full range. No.
Whatever is meant to be, to be here in this space.
Totally. So where I'd love to start is your story, because there's a real experience of Into the Nothing that I'm experiencing in myself through the meditations that I actually do with you. This place of spaciousness, of peace, of it just keeps unfolding and getting deeper. And I'd just love to know, like, how you got to this place where you can actually share that, how you got to the place where you wanted to experience that. Why did you move from the life that you had before to, like, you've been a physio, and so many different parts of your life. Like, how did you get to this place where you're just so connected to this spaciousness that sits within us? That's a big question, I know, but I feel like you'll know where to go with that.
That's a big question. It's a big question, and I relate. I listened to your first podcast with a friend of yours who said it was pain, and it was pain. I think pain, unfortunately, propels us. We want it to be inspiration and, exciting things, but often it's pain, at least at the start. Yeah. And when I was really feeling into this going into nothing tends to come from a search for something, and then we realize that something is nothing and nothing is everything. It's like, something is nothing and nothing is everything. And I feel like my whole life, and I often say this and ask people to put their hands up at my events, like, who else feels like their whole life they have been trying to work it out, like just trying to work out what is the meaning of life, like what is everyone doing? I don't get it. I'm like, it's not making sense. And like, mostly 2/3 of the room put their hands up and go, yep, I totally don't get it. And I guess that's the people that I attract that are already starting to wake up, or already, somewhere there. But that was definitely my experience. Was it right from the dot? I was like, so who is God, and what does this mean, and why are you doing this? And just looking around me and thinking, I don't get it. I don't get what the point of this existence is if it's just the 9 to 5 and doing this and coming home and having a headache and then having a wine and getting up and doing it all over again. That I would see. And I had a lovely upbringing, great parents, very supportive, which allowed me time to ponder my navel, But I started to then seek heightened experiences, that I think you can relate to, Patrice, of sharing some of your story with me.
Yeah.
So I started to seek, and I was seeking something, to feel something that was bigger than whatever it was I was experiencing. So first of all, it was, just achieving. So achieving didn't really get me the validation that I wanted. And so then I was like, well, bugger that. That's not really working for me. I'll go down the alternative route. I had dreads and desert boots and was painting stuff and myself before most people were, it wasn't really a thing. And traveling and, living in a van and all of that stuff, smoking a lot of pot to try and find something that made sense. And I think as well, those of us that have gone through a drug phase, which many people, I think, on the spiritual path, but I don't think I know anyone that's on the spiritual path that hasn't gone through a drug phase, is it's part of that transition of realizing that something is nothing. Everything around us is really nothing, and we're trying to touch the nothing. And feel that, feel the something in the nothing, like just feel that expansive state. I feel like we've all maybe tasted it in past lives, and we're looking to kind of like, where was that again? Like, what happened, And for me, that was a beautiful time. It was an amazing time. It was a creative time. But then I soon realized that there was an edge to that. There was a wall to that. It started to really numb experience and not go into that expansive state. So that was then when I shifted gears and, left England and came to Australia, thinking, well, a different country might sort things out a little bit. But it's really just you in another place. So there was more expansion, which is interesting. And I felt very divinely guided to be here in Australia. And I feel like that was the universal nudge. It really wasn't a mind decision. From a young age, I was like, I'm going to live in Canada or Australia. So the universe was trying to prompt me to obviously be in a more expansive place, to help me drop into, a more expansive place within me, is how it feels looking back. Yeah, we don't know these things necessarily at the time. We're just like following the breadcrumbs. And it was interesting because at that time when really I had everything, I had 2 kids, I had a successful business, I had, a house. I'm living on a freaking island, which, when you come from England, it's just paradise. I'm living on the beach, an hour from a city. It's like, what? I had all this stuff, and I hit my lowest point, which was just really intense headaches that needed, massive amounts of medication to like just even deal. Just hitting a low point with where I was at, where I was going to go. I sort of burnt out as a physio. I was disillusioned with that. I had 2 kids at home, and it's that feeling of I've got everything that I sort of put out there, that every average sane person needs or wants, to feel safe and comfortable, and have a purpose. And yet, why am I feeling so shit? So it wasn't necessarily kind of burnout in the sense of, corporate burnout, but it was that fizzle out of, well, who am I? Like, I've been trying to pretend that everything was okay and, I've got everything I need. But really my soul was just going, what are you doing? What are you doing? So that journey into nothingness, into spaciousness, came out of a necessity to escape pain. the physical pain I was in with my headaches. Like they were literally so intense I would hit my head against the wall because it was better than the pain that I was in.
Oh my God.
And I remember once I just had to get my husband to take me to the doctors to get a pethidine shot, which, I would take pop, but I wouldn't take paracetamol. It was kind of like that, so and she gave me a pethidine shot, which like literally had me in bed for 2 days, like just out. And so I was convinced I had a brain tumor, because why else would you have so much pain,
Yeah.
And if I have a brain tumor, then, well, someone can take it out and that would be all good. But, I didn't have a brain tumor, luckily. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but equally there was no one but myself to deal with this pain and, work my way through it. And my pattern had been to try and to be the best and to be perfect and to fix stuff. And as we know, and Patrice, with the work that we do and the shadow work, I had to go to the other end of the scale and go, I have no idea. Everything I have learned so far about anything is nothing. I know nothing. And just to really surrender into that place. There was nowhere else to go. There was nowhere else to look. There was,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that was really the beginning of going into that place of going, how much can I sit with this pain? And it's an interesting thing, sitting with discomfort. We can sit with it and observe it and kind of focus on it, and it can sometimes intensify. And then we get to this point again of like, oh, here I go again. I'm like focusing on it, trying to fix it or do something with it. And the point where the shift happens is when you allow it to expand. And I think you've had an experience of this, when you go into that pain so deeply in the awareness of it, that it expands so completely that you just let it take all of you. Just let yourself completely to surrender to it. And that's when all of a sudden it's like, oh, it actually doesn't really have a hold anymore, because I've gone so completely into that. I'm not in resistance to it anymore. And what I've painfully learnt is that it's only when we're in resistance to anything that we feel discomfort. The discomfort comes around, like whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally. So our biggest journey is to lower resistance, and that's really what going into the nothing, or one of the aspects of going into nothing is, right? It's just to take away all of that resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did someone in that moment, or were there many moments where you just really allowed it and sat with the discomfort of the pain, and really, did someone guide you? How did you know to do that? Or did you just get to the point where I'm like, I don't have an option? Like, can you remember how that happened for you?
Bit of both, because I mean, like since I was a teenager, I'd kind of done yoga, going to the school hall and stuff like that. And I'd lived at a Buddhist center for a while, and I'd, touched into things and read things. So I had just some loose, ideas around that. But it was very much the yearning. Like I knew that I was here for a spiritual path, but I hadn't found my teacher, like I was just still clutching at kind of random straws. And so I really, at that point when I was in so much pain, that was the other aspect, was the prayer of like the deep yearning in tears. And if you looked at my journal, oh my God, like I looked at it the other week, back then was just like, she's in pain, girl. Like she's just like, full of things like pain makes me the person I don't want to be. And please God, like,
Yeah.
It was just so intense, heartfelt pourings out that were, so true to where I was at and what I was just in complete surrender. Like, I have no idea, show me the way. And so, yes, so teachers started to come in, and one of my dear teachers, Gwen Williams, that showed me a whole different way to work with bodies through focused intention and deep presence and intuition, was one of my first teachers that really helped me to drop into my body and to really feel and to trust my own, inner compass and my own wisdom. So he was definitely somebody that was a guide for me. And then I became a yoga teacher. So it was, you know, through that yoga journey as well that I learned the power of devotion, which is just another aspect of surrender, right? And it doesn't have to be not necessarily devotion to something outside of ourselves. It may feel like that for some. For me, it was partly that and a real deep going in. Deep going into what is that? What is the divine? You know, who am I, and how does that all interrelate? And that's a very personal journey, you know, that I think everyone needs to take for themselves and not be overly, you know, funneled into that, because I think it's a very personal thing.
Yeah.
So they were kind of my first real teachers of presence, of what it is to create that space, of what it is to surrender, and of what it is to take responsibility for how I was showing up, which is huge.
Yeah.
Because we can spend so much time, right, don't we, like blaming our environment or, you know, parents or things someone said to me, or I'm just not good enough, and just that critical mind. And just that loving compassion to self, but also, taking responsibility. This is my body, this is my soul, this is my mind, this is my energy. So how do I own that without trying to take control over that? Because that's just more resistance, right? Trying to shift it.
So tricky. Like, and so many, and they're big concepts. Hey, like when you hear, I don't know, when I hear the word and feel the word surrender, I'm like, fuck, what does that mean? You know, like they're big.
Yeah.
And the thing that I have learned through working with you and being supported by you is mastery, and doing these simple things with repetition and just keep doing because they keep deepening. And so where you are right now and what you've created in terms of the Be a Beacon program in particular, you know, you make these concepts that are so big, like initially, like, you know, you're still using these words, but the thing that I love about you is that you make them so they're tangible and so they're practical for, you know, any woman in Australia. And so how did you get to that point? Because there, you know, I feel like the more I get to know you, the more I work with you, I'm like, I just feel the resonance of like these ancient practices and so much, there's so much going on behind the scenes with you. And I know that, but the way that you communicate that and bring that in for the women that are in the Be a Beacon, like I love it, because in this program that I'm in with Bex is, you know, I'm 32 and there are women in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s, and I think even in their 70s. You just attract like this, and I just feel so blessed that I get to spend time with women of all these different ages and backgrounds. But you have such a gift in making these concepts so practical and tangible. How did you get to that point?
That's a difficult one to answer, isn't it? How did I get to that point? I think I've just been so blessed. I do feel so blessed in the teachers that I've had, you know, and when I sort of went on from those first two teachers, I started to work with an amazing woman called Rachel Jane Groover, who's very practical, very down to earth and tangible, very business orientated and very spiritual. And she taught me how to really be in my feminine presence, you know, and the power of womb space. Well, she was one of my first people that dropped me into that, even that concept, which really helped me to translate some of these kind of what felt like semi-intangible spiritual practices, and helped me to translate that into a world where I'm a mum, I have a business, I have a husband who's not particularly spiritual. Like, how does that all fit? Yeah. And so I feel like really then it was just my own commitment to myself and incorporating this into my life, because I didn't want my life to fall apart and lose my husband and, you know, like feel the distancing from my family. I still wanted all of that. Yeah. So, you know, all of this time I'm coaching clients, all of this time I'm still working with myself. And it was really that living it thing, that you have the personal experience. You've been there, you've done it, you've felt it, you've explored all aspects of it. So therefore the language then comes to be able to help other people, and you can see yourself in different parts of, you know, my clients' lives, whether they're 70 or 30. I see little bits of me in all of you and in all of them, and you know, I can relate to it because I've lived it, because I'm attracting people, you know, that that are in a similar, were in a similar place to me on some level. You know, they're resonating. And I also feel like, you know, part of that's, you know, I'm very obviously born a bit that way. Like my mum was a teacher. I've been teaching as a physio and connecting and relating to people for, you know, all of my sort of grown up life. So I was used to sort of working in group dynamics and that kind of thing. So that just gave me that tangible kind of skill.
Yeah.
But the rest of it was my own desire to be able to relate this in the world, because as much as I wanted to sit in a cave in the Himalayas and stuff off and do nothing but meditate, here I was, you know, in a relationship that I've been in for now 30 years, which takes work, and, you know, kids and all of that without any family backup, because we're in Australia and everyone's in the UK. So it was out of necessity and a deep commitment to embracing the nothing and the being in the doing, and wanting to be of service to other women, because I could see myself in other women and and see their pain.
I might butcher this, but I love how you say you're of the world but not in it. Is that right?
Both. It's kind of in and, you know, it's bridging both, and also it's bridging this practical to the spiritual. It's like being in the world but not of the world.
Yes, that's what it is. Yeah, I love that. Sorry, I knew I'd mess it up. And so why do you think it's so important for just everyday, like modern society, to have these kind of ancient, or these practices, these spiritual practices? Like, what is it that drives you to, you know, for example, for me right now, and experiencing through your meditations and doing these meditations where we move up through the different chakras and the mastery of these practices of, you know, being in your womb space, and we do these other beautiful exercises where we connect with different energy centers in our body, and the spaciousness that I'm feeling, like that nothing that I'm feeling. Like, why is it important for a woman in Brisbane or anywhere to be connecting with this place in herself?
Great question. It comes down to really that's the essence and the truth of who we are, and everything else is changeable. You know, everything else is changing around us. Like, our emotions are changing constantly, our environment's changing constantly, our minds fluctuating around in whirlpools, and we need like a safe anchorage. We need to know where home is, because we can't rely on anything. We can't rely on anything that's external to ourselves. We can't really rely on this physical body. I can't really just rely on my mind. It's fickle, right? So we have to learn where home is, you know, and that's a deep, unwavering, unchanging place of equanimity within us. And the reason that we work the way that we do, with the body, with the energy, with the emotion, with everything, but initially with presence in ourselves, into the nothing, which is something in ourselves, is that we need to find that home. And for women and for men, it's just in a slightly different place. You know, it's womb space, because it's at the very center of ourselves. And so it creates, I feel like, you know, the womb is the anchor. That's what keeps us feeling centered, feeling safe, so then we can show up in the way that we want to. Otherwise, our showing up is through the filter of fear, is through the filter of doubt, is through the filter of all of our past experiences defining who we are. And when we come back to the nothingness, which is the true essence of ourself, that's when we, you know, it's the self-realization, you know, the realization of self, capital S, of who we actually are. That's when we can claim our divine sovereignty. And there's sort of work to be done on that, because over this lifetime, and maybe many lifetimes, we've squashed that. And we've accumulated, if you like, scars on a physical and emotional and energetic level that stop us from being able to contact that higher aspect of ourselves and stay with it and express it, especially when things get challenging in the world. So unless we strengthen the muscle of our presence and strengthen this capacity to access all our different amazingness in our energetic kind of world and in our higher self, then we keep getting overshadowed by the body and the mind and just the busyness of daily life.
It's and something that I've learned through working with you is it's a practice. Like I remember at our retreat last year, I had this beautiful experience where we connected with our heart after many different days of different practices to deepen and really connect with our heart's desires. And I really felt the vision of my future, which I thought for a long time was my head and my ego, or was I dreaming too big? And I'm like, I really felt like the beautiful property with my partner Ted, and kids and donkeys and all these things. And I said to Bex, I'm like, oh, it's done now. And you were like, no, now the work begins. It's an even a greater commitment and devotion to daily practice. To really, really connect. It never ends, and this practice is just. And the more that I lean into it too, that's something that I've really experienced is just keep leaning into it, like for example, like in meditation, when my mind's like, okay, yep, jump out now. Like you've gone to that spacious place, jump out. And in that moment, because of the mastery that we've done together, it's like in that moment, I just lean back a little bit more into the spaciousness. When I want to come out, I just, guide my body and train my body and my system to just go back there and just rest there. So that's my home base. But it has been a journey, like a year working with you, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, cool. Like and I love that. And a question that came up for me when you were speaking is around the mind. Like, what's your relationship with the mind, or how would you describe the mind in comparison to your soul or your truth, or how do we be with the mind?
Oh, we just have to be. It's that we just have to be with the mind. Is manipulative. The mind has an agenda. The mind is trying to like save itself, prove itself. Right? It's always just busy in that space. And we're never going to get rid of the mind, because it's a pretty damn useful thing to do too. Like it's great at math, and like it has some key jobs to do. But when we align to it, when we believe all those stories, then that's where the danger lies. So it's becoming. There's a beautiful song that I play that comes up all the time at the end of yoga, and it's like, I'm not really in battle with my ego. I'm trying to make friends with it. Because again, if we're in battle with something, it's just coming into more resistance. We're expecting it to go away. We're expecting to defeat it. It's like, well, no, you have a mind. You don't really want to be mindless. Like it's not going to go down too well. It wants to be our friend. We want to work in partnership with it. We want to know where its strengths lie. Like I have a quick mind that can compute and understand things. That's great. But it's also quick to judge and criticize, right? So I have to like observe that. It's ahead of me all the time. So I'm like, okay, just sit back, but I can use it for the power of good, but not let it sort of, carry me away into, that inner critic, or the spiral of perfection, which was, a big part of my old story and can still raise its head at times. So it's learning to know your mind, know your patterns, so that you can be like, there's that story, there's that pattern. And because you've trained the muscle of awareness so well, you're able to sit and see that. And then when we're not caught up in it, the attachments aren't so strong. It doesn't hang around so much and, propel us into action with the mind. We can sit back and be like, wait for a moment now, into the nothingness of sitting back and just observing, to see whether the mind is guiding us down a useful path right now that's going to lead to expansion, or whether it's a path that's leading to contraction, keeping us small, keeping us stuck.
And that's that place that I can now reference and go back to, that my body I can really feel it's so funny, because it's such a feeling. It's such an experience. So the words to sometimes find for this place that I'm experiencing in meditation, and now because I've practiced it so much in a daily practice, I can, when I really feel like I'm getting really heady, really in my mind, in chaos, self-doubt, insecurity, just so much judgment with myself, I just breathe, and I can come into my womb space and come into this, like the lower half of my body, and and to have that reference point has just completely changed my life. And combining the womb space and the presence there with the presence of awareness. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like combining the different parts that I have learned through being with you, having that be my home base. Like I feel as though for so long my mind was like the elephant, and there was a mosquito of my soul, and now I feel like it's kind of like switched. I'm like, the bigger part of me is like connected with this spacious place, and the mosquitoes are still there, but they're mosquitoes. They're in terms of scale and size. That's the role.
Yeah.
But the practice never ends, and it gets deeper.
Yeah.
I think I said to you at the last retreat, I'm like, I can't even imagine what you're experiencing, Bex, because I just started to get opened up to this place of spacious, and I'm like, if you've been doing this for a few years, if it gets deeper, where are you going? Like, what are you experiencing?
And you can't explain, like, so there's no point sort of like trying to explain anything, because everything's so personal, isn't it? And like you say, it's hard to put words around your descriptions of things. It's just having that trust that, you know, in yourself, you can look back and go, well, this is how I felt a year ago when I started this program. Or even if you've just been doing some, you mentioned the Headspace app, you know, for someone that's just been doing some meditation for a little bit, and think, okay, well, where was I at even at the beginning of this meditation to the end? Or where was I at last year compared to now? It shows you, that potential. And then we have faith to, work and keep building that faith that there's, even greater places for us to expand into. Not that that's necessarily a goal, but just to sort of help us stay with that consistency and with the practice.
Yeah.
There is, hope in action, but we can't just sit back and go, now we're done. That thing that you said before, it's like, oh, I'm there. And that's this amazing spiritual bypassing thing, isn't it? We have a great cathartic release, or we have an amazing experience, and then we're like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, I'm done. I've felt this now. But like I always say, it's like, you've got through that track, that new pathway once, and now we have to keep clearing that pathway and keep walking that pathway so that the old pathways can grow over and become disused.
Yeah.
Otherwise, when the shit hits the fan, you're still going to go down the easiest pathway, which is the most used one. Even if you've just had an amazing experience and you know it, and then that's when the guilt comes in, because you're like, oh shit, like I know this stuff and I still did something that didn't feel good and that I know isn't right. And then the whole guilt and shame and, inner critic just flares up even more.
Yeah.
But when we know, and we can lovingly just say to ourselves, okay, this practice of being in the nothingness and being present with myself, whether that's a physical practice to release trauma or stress in the body, whether that's, a shadow work practice, it's all presence within those practices to release wherever we've been holding this stress and tension and patterns that aren't useful. It's all going into the deep center and the deep presence in all of that work to make it more powerful. And then we're building the capacity to, like you say, catch yourself in a moment and be like, this is one of those moments. This is one of those like choice points where I could go down a habitual old pattern, or I could make a different choice. And there's the medicine of that pause of the nothingness, to kind of be able to pause in that moment and go, okay, which path am I going to choose? And it's okay if we go down an old path, but we just kind of see it. And I think you mentioned this, I was listening to one of your personal one the other day around addictions, like it's okay if you can just see that and go, okay, I'm going to go down this old path now, whether it's coffee or alcohol or whatever, or movie or whatever it is, saying something. But at least the first step is that conscious awareness that you're seeing it, and now you're making a choice rather than it being a blind reaction.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's still a step forward. That's still a better path, and then enjoying it, and then going, okay, well, if I'm going to do that, then I'm really going to freaking enjoy it. I'm going to make it a sacred moment. I'm going to bring as much presence and joy to this glass of wine or this coffee or this conversation or this whatever it is that you've decided to do that maybe doesn't feel like it's the highest, but you're still in it. You're the common denominator, right? So why not just bring the highest version of yourself to that, even if you maybe not doing the highest thing? Just bring the best of yourself to it.
And when you were speaking earlier about there's things that happen in our life that are kind of in a way of us connecting with our higher self. There's things that happen that kind of But this is a bit of like, this is just like pure curiosity. I'm like, why do you think there's so many challenges to connecting with our higher self? Like what's like, why is there so much in the way? Is it like the purpose of being human because we're here to ascend and grow? Like why can't we just be our bloody higher selves?
Yeah, the biggest spiritual question, why can't I just let this go and be my higher self?
Yeah.
I think exactly that. It's a journey. It's about, what do we appreciate and how do we appreciate it based on how hard it was to get it?
Mm.
You know, it's like, if something was just handed to you on a plate, you're like, oh, that's great, thanks, you know. But when we've really had to work and we've sweated and we've surrendered and we're like, oh my God, time and time and time and time again for just one little more square of the chocolate bar. Like, it feels like sometimes, you know, I used to say to my spiritual teacher, like, I've given up all of this, but I don't feel like I've really got much in return yet, you know, like,
yeah,
it's like a little glimpse and then it's gone and then I'm back into an old pattern and then I've had another glimpse and then I'm back into the throes of old patterns. And she was like, well, yeah, it is a bit like it is, you know, it's 3 steps forward and sometimes it feels like 2 back, but you're always just getting that little bit forward. It's about building faith. It's about building faith in something that's greater than you.
Yeah.
And it's also about making you a better person.
Mm.
Like, if we're not, you know, that there's a spiritual awakening, yeah, but then there's the growing up that we have to do in our mind. There's the cleaning up we have to do in our body and for the environment. There's the showing up we have to do, like, in our highest capacity, and all of that doesn't happen overnight. Otherwise we'd just be made perfected beings, and then there's no real point of the universe. We might as well just all be, you know, floating around as particles of God, you know, like. So the only point is to have this kind of this transition, and I think we don't just wake up spiritually, or some do, and unfortunately then abuse that. You know, I was just actually reading a book of a dear friend of mine, if anyone wants to read it, on the dangers of spirituality and not following a path where you're empowered and someone else is trying to take the power over you. It's the kind of dangers of following a guru that disempowers you. It's called Serpent Rising by Mary Garden. Can't remember where I was going with that, but yeah, being able to be in integrity in that spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
And everything has to be coming on board, right? So you have to be morally at that same level. You need to be, you know, showing up at the same level. It's, you know, the philosophical aspects of the yogic path or the spiritual path, where you are, you know, having an allegiance to, say, truth, that everything, you're not going to live in untruth in any way, right? There's living in saucha, living in, you know, cleanliness and purity, as much as you can. So we're wanting to refine all those moral aspects as well, because there's a power that goes with the spiritual awakening and the purity of the body and mind, you know, and it's the power to understand and to see what people are thinking. There's a power to, you know, materialize objects, and we've seen that, you know, in gurus that have then found out to have been doing pretty nasty things, you know. So there's so much power that comes potentially from the spiritual awakening, that the universe is trying to ensure that everything else of you is growing up at the same rate and awakening at the same rate. Because we can see when it does go wrong, you know. And as in anything, where one part of ourselves gets stronger than the rest of it. And I think that's the beauty right now for those of us that, you know, we're living a pretty blessed life, let's face it, you know, you and I, and probably most of the people listening to this, is that we have an opportunity right now to really, you know, show up in our highest on every level, you know. And truth is one of the things that's, you know, the most valuable, and it can't be comprehended by the mind. You know, it is something that's to be felt and to be, because it, you know, it moves beyond just right or wrong. It goes into that highest truth in any moment. And so that's really what the spiritual path is demanding of us. And that takes work, because we're trying to work that out, because we have so many influences, and we can see that politically and environmentally at the moment. You know, the world's just so complex. And it takes a mastery and a cleaning up of our own shit to kind of even discern our way through, like, what the frig is truth and where am I supposed to be doing right now? And what's the universe asking of me when there's so much noise, you know?
Yeah, and with the noise, and something that, again, that I've learned from you is around, you know, when you choose, or when the path chooses you and you choose this path, whatever, you know, and we've spoken once around certain things in our lives, I guess distractions, and they actually give you up. I love that you said that. I share that with my friends all the time, because I'm like, it's such an interesting concept to think that, you know, you're choosing this path of really getting to know your higher self, and, you know, remove things from your life that you're actually in your body saying no to, but maybe in your life is still saying yes, whether that's social media or friends in your life that aren't, you know, and then it gets to a point where you keep choosing this path and connecting with yourself and connecting with this beautiful, spacious, powerful place, and things just give you up. Because I remember you were saying, like, even with wine, can you just tell that story? Or like even other things in your life that you feel like distractions, like your body was like, no, and you're just like, oh, I'll keep giving it a go. And it's like, and the thing's like, no.
Yeah. It ain't happening. No. That's it. Totally. And it just gets too uncomfortable, you know, to do something. So then you just go, oh. And my husband would even say to me, remember, that's not going to feel good. You don't like doing that. You did tell me to tell you not to do that. You know? And he'd be like, well, everyone else is doing it. You know, I'm not someone who has been brought up in spirituality. I'm not surrounded by every single person that I know is fully into spirituality and on the path. You know, my husband's not. He's very profound, very wise, very kind of Buddha-like already. You know, he has beer and he does this and that. So, you know, the family and my family and other people will eat things and do things and drink things that I don't feel like for me. So it's a challenge. And I feel like I'm here in this role and in this body and in this life for exactly that, to, you know, be in my highest integrity, irrespective of the challenges that are right in my immediate environment, you know, and it helps me relate to the women that I work with. And like you said, Patrice, you know, the broad spectrum of women that I attract that, again, that are in the world and want to be more on that spiritual path, but wouldn't necessarily normally be drawn to it. You know, so, you know, I feel like that's kind of where my niche is. But in terms of this giving things up, it, you know, it helps me to relate to everybody else and their normalness of just stuff, right, and life that are challenges. But it gets to a point, like you say, when your allegiance is really to your higher self, then everything that pulls you out of alignment with that becomes more uncomfortable and becomes more painful. And you can deal with that sometimes for a while, and you go, okay, I'll have this and I'm going to feel shit in the morning, you know. And then you just go, you know what? The payoff is just not worth it. It's just not worth it. And then you sort of find where your new edge is. Like where your new edge is. I can have a little bit of this. This is about how much I can have of this before I know this is going to throw me for X amount of time. And you just come to your own level of okayness with that. It's not worth beating yourself up about. It's like I always say to people, don't just take stuff out of your life, put more in terms of what you're aligning to, because the things that aren't for you will fall away. But if you constantly just keep trying to deprive yourself of this and deprive yourself of that, you're going to end up just going, well, fuck this. I'm just feeling now that I am deprived, and so my ego is going to fight back and I'm going to want it.
Yeah.
Whereas it's a far better way to have the allegiance. I want a better life for myself. I want to have more energy. I want to be less reactive. I want, you know, to feel more desire about my purpose. I want more abundance. So I'm going to do the work, the inner work. I'm going to carve out and be tough on myself in that respect to create routine and whatever practices to clean up in all those different areas. And then just with that refined awareness, with that refined body, with that refined energy, things will just start to fall away from you that aren't serving you anymore.
Yeah.
And it might take a while and they'll come and go, you know.
Yeah.
It's, everything then just starts to come in to support you in that way. And then you don't have to feel guilty. We're here to enjoy. And it's just at the different levels of enjoyment will become things that, you know, the things that you will enjoy more are going to become lighter things, you know, and become more expansive things. And when you're used to being an expansive, light, clear, beautiful space, then when you have a weekend, I don't know, like, I mean, and I still do it sometimes, like I'm so not perfect, you know, and, you know, if I have friends over, or particularly when I have family here and everyone's cracking open the wine and there's, you know, chips and there's this and there's desserts, and then, you know, like I'll have stuff because I'm like, I just want to, you know, you just want to sometimes fit in with everyone and do the thing, and, you know, and then you're like, oh, you know, headaches for the next day. It's just being kind to yourself, you know, it's about living, it's about softening, and it's about just keep coming back to, and there's times to put your stake in the ground and go like, this is what I'm doing, and there's times to allow some flexibility and be kind to yourself.
It's definitely been a process for me around around alcohol. It's like I've never had a problem with it, but it's just that I don't really enjoyed it, and I haven't for a long time. Like when I left Sydney and I moved home to live on the farm and just have a break from the life and trying to figure myself out when I was about 27, I was living with mum and dad for the first time since I was like 14. And every night they would have a wine and a beer. And I don't know, I think the rebel in me initially was just like, I'm not doing it just because, you know, but it was just like actually underneath, I'm like, I just don't enjoy it. And I felt a little bit left out because my mum and my sister really bond over wine. Like, and I love that they do that. And I felt like, oh, do they think that I'm some hippie trying to be all this? And I think for a while I kind of was, and now it's just, it's just taken some time to really have the courage within myself to be really okay with me not doing it. And the second I really felt it in myself that I didn't have to prove anything. Like it was, you know, they don't even ask me anymore. It was about having a wine. It's so interesting, you know, so often. And another mentor of mine, you know, I was talking to him about wanting to speak to my parents and my sister about having, you know, an open channel and speaking to like my nan and everything on the other side. And he was like, why do you feel like you need to? And I said, I just feel like I should tell them. And he said, you just want them to say that they still love you. And the only person that you need to have that conversation with is yourself. And then no other conversation actually needs to be had. Which was a bit, again, that reminded me of that, you know, with alcohol and things like that. It's just like when I really come to terms with it in myself and accept it in myself, it's actually no other real conversation needs to be had with anyone else. But it's taken time to really find that home in myself around something like drinking. Yeah. And not to say like every now and then if there's something to celebrate and there's a really good quality bottle of champagne or Chardonnay or something, I'm like, if it is like beautiful, I'm there, but my whole body needs to be a yes.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing. It's like you can elevate any experience, but you can't kid yourself that you're doing that, right? Like you can't, you know, kid ourselves, but you can elevate any experience. And it's all about the intention and the energy behind something. And so much of like alcohol and, you know, overeating and all of that is about filling the hole, filling the feeling of nothingness, that I am nothing, you know, rather than this real sense of nothing is something.
Yeah.
It's really just trying to feel, I don't know, it sounds messed up. But what we're trying to do is to fill the hole that feels like nothing, right? Or we're trying to validate by doing the same as everybody else. Or we're just trying to feel better because, again, there's that sense of I'm less than.
Yeah.
So if you're in a, you know, and I still do this sometimes, like if I'm in a, you know, really uplifting thing, I'm in a really beautiful restaurant and I'm there with Rich and we're on a date night and stuff, sometimes I won't drink more often than not. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, I used to love whiskey. Do you know, and a whiskey cocktail or something, because it's just, everything feels so expansive. And my body's response then to that is so different than if I'm just trying to fit in. It just feels amazing. There's still more expansion. I don't feel yucky afterwards. It's just an opening. I'm okay with it, you know? So it's like, what's the intention behind something? That's what brings more energy to it, or less energy to it, or, you know?
It's crazy how much that is the truth. Like I even, you know, when I was really feeling so unsure in myself and feeling very insecure and I was drinking coffee, and I couldn't drink coffee, you know, and I was like saying it was the coffee, but the more that I actually came into presence with myself or feeling good in my body and feeling, you know, like, oh, I've got a bit of confidence or just feeling like, oh, I can feel myself and I'm feeling better. Coffee didn't impact me because I was coming from a different place when I was drinking it. And I was like, oh my God, there's something here. This is really interesting. It was less about the substance and more about how I was feeling in my body. And I was blaming the like I started to notice that with coffee. I'm like, oh, it's really the energy and the feeling inside and I'm blaming it on this thing.
Yeah. And yet we've got to be careful with that attitude as well, haven't we? Like I say, because we don't want to just kid ourselves, because there's plenty of people that I know that go, oh, I'm fine with a glass of wine every night. So, it doesn't bother me and I'm still this, that and the other. And you're like, like really like question that, So
yeah.
it's just coming back to what is truly the state of my beingness when I'm at that choice point of doing something or not doing something, having something or not having something, and
yeah.
Like we're always playing with like break your pattern. If there's a pattern there, be curious about it, because a pattern is a habit, and is it a habit that's expanding you and uplifting you and moving you forward, or is it a pattern and a habit that's contracting you and keeping you in your patterns, habitual mental patterns and self-soothing patterns and self-validating patterns. Yeah, that's the big one.
Yeah. And just bringing the conversation back to enjoy and enjoyment of life, like all of this, because I feel like a lot of this personal development stuff can just get so heavy and we're trying to fix ourselves, and it's not. And a friend of mine, Jared Grantham, often says, like, we do this healing work so we can experience more of life. It's not to heal all of our trauma, because we can't. It's to actually experience more of life, and this place of nothingness that you have guided me to in myself, Rebecca. When I first touched it, I was like, that's actually kind of boring, because it wasn't, I was so used to being stimulated and being busy that when I got to there, I was like, what's the point? And even I had a moment in the retreat with you last year where I got to that point where I wasn't bored. It was actually so expansive that I was like, I've felt this now. What's the point in living? Not from like a suicidal place or like a negative place, but I'm like, I actually had this moment in one of your exercises, in one of our activities, where I was laying there just going, okay, I don't understand the point of living. And then instead of trying to force an answer or trying to figure it out, I'm like, I'm just going to be calm in this question. And as I opened our eyes and as we came out of this exercise, I just sat in it. I'm like, this is a big question. This is a big feeling. But it wasn't scary. It was just like big. And then as I opened my eyes, I sank into it. And I looked around at the other women who were at the retreat, and then I just felt this overwhelming feeling of just love for people and love for the women in front of me. I was like overwhelmed with like being human. So it's so interesting how it just, it's you through your work, I've just experienced that life is just everything. It is just everything. It's so, it's the pain and pleasure together. It's the anger and the sadness that also has joy. It's just like, whoa, this life. And being able to go to a place in myself where I can reference this spacious place to have that as my home base is the best thing that's ever happened to me.
No, it's so beautiful. Yeah, it's so gorgeous to hear. And I love the way that you just shared that, because it's so true and it's so what I experienced. I think before I learned the real embodiment piece, when I was sort of been with my yoga teachers, as amazing as they were, no one told me where to live in my body.
Oh.
And so I was in the spiritual place of, well, what is the, like you were saying, well, kind of what is the point of living if I can just sit here and be in this beautiful place? What's the point of everything else? And it wasn't until I discovered womb space and how to really center myself in that place and still do all this other stuff, like that's just the anchor for all of these other experiences and practices, that I got what you're getting now is that, oh my gosh, this is the point that God or whatever that higher consciousness was doing when it went, let's move consciousness into physical form. It was like, I want to experience in myself. I want to experience consciousness in all these different ways, embodied as a flower, as embodied as, another woman, as embodied as a man, embodied as food. And then it's the joy the oozes out. Yeah, and the compassion and the love in everything from being able to experience it through a place of deep presence.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh. I feel like even just like listening to your voice, everyone's going to be like, oh, I can breathe again. That's what I love. I love being with Bex because it's just like, oh, you just remind me to just, we get to slow down and be human. I just love it so much. Thank you so much for coming in and joining me in this conversation of Into the Nothing.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's it's a beautiful topic and it's a beautiful place. And every time we share this stuff, right, we get an opportunity to go in deeper as we're sharing it, we're experiencing it. So it's it's a win-win.
Yeah. And Bex, where's the best place for people to find you online?
Yeah, look, if you're local to Bribie, check out my website because I'm running yoga classes. That's just bexthompson.com. Bex is with BEKS, Thompson with an H and a P. And I reclaimed my name last year. So there's a bit of confusion because I'm now Rebecca Bex because so much that I've produced and I'm a CD and all of that is in Bex Thompson. And yet I'm really enjoying the energy of reclaiming Rebecca. So on Facebook it's Rebecca Bex Thompson, my personal page, and you can connect in through that. And, the business is Rebecca Thompson Be a Beacon on Facebook. So any of those, it tends to pop up if you search Rebecca or Bex Thompson.
I can't recommend working with Rebecca enough. Like, honestly, I just like, just profound. And just one last question that I thought would be fun. Like, what's your favorite mantra, or what's your favorite, is there something that's like flowing through your body at the moment that you're just loving?
My favorite mantra, I think, is always the Durga mantra. It's always the Durga mantra. I've got a big Durga statue at the end of my pool, which is surrounded by desert rose, which I love because it's just like the embodiment of masculine, feminine energy. Because the desert rose, I don't know if you know, it's quite a bare plant. It's just kind of there. It's quite structural. And it has these most beautiful pink flowers and they're so abundant. Like it's always got freaking flowers on it. And it's just this most awesome, manifestation of divine, masculine, feminine energy. And Durga, it feels like that for me. Like she has such an amazing balance. So the energy of Durga, if anyone doesn't know, she's kind of one of the key archetypes in the sort of three phases of spirituality, and she's the warrior, so if the three phases are kind of like destruction and things dying and coming back, and then there's sustaining and there's creation, she's involved with the death, but it's the death of your ego, it's the death of the things that aren't serving you. And so she is both super compassionate, like a compassionate mother, but she's fierce like a mother protecting her children. She has the consort of lions, again, for that sort of fierceness but cuddliness. I still think lions are cuddly. I know they're pretty dangerous, but that it's that feeling of the energy we need right now, I believe, to be our warriors, but to still have that deep softness and compassion. So,
yes. Oh my God. Well, and lionesses, that I remember you sharing that concept of, they can, find prey and kill it and eat it and hunt it, and then at the same time they lick their baby cubs, it's like
we have to embody both. It's that beautiful polarity of being able to explore that whole realm. When we can do that in a really healthy way, then it's in a way that aligns with truth, and it doesn't come out as a surprise, and we don't come out with that so we're too in protective mode. Like we can play with it all and take what we need when we need it.
Thank you so much for joining us on Into the Nothing, Rebecca Thompson.
Thank you, Patrice.
I love you. Thank you.
Take care, honey.
Thanks, guys.